My name is Thomas, and today, at 25 years old, I finally decided to share something that happened to me when I was just 8 in our apartment in Brooklyn, New York. It was an old building on Ocean Avenue, built in the 1940s with those characteristic fire escapes and weathered exposed bricks. We lived on the 5th floor, apartment 5C. I remember perfectly the floral wallpaper, peeling at the edges and the characteristic creaking of the wooden floor. My room was at the end of the hallway, with a window that overlooked a narrow alley between the buildings. It was in that room that everything began. The first time I saw them, I was playing with my toy cars near my bed. It was an autumn afternoon, and the orange sunlight cast strange shadows through the curtain. At first, I thought they were just normal shadows, but then I realized they moved independently, as if they had a life of their own. They were dark shapes, some tall and slender, others short and twisted. They always appeared at the same time, between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., when the sunlight began to weaken. At first, they just watched, standing in the corners of the room or near my old wardrobe. I told my mom, but she attributed it all to my vivid imagination. Things started to get worse when I realized they weren't just watching. I began to wake up with scratches on my arms and legs. Small at first, but they became deeper over time. My mom became worried, thinking I was hurting myself in my sleep, and took me to several doctors. The worst episode happened one December night. Snow was falling outside, and I was wrapped in my blanket, trying to sleep. I felt something cold touch my ankle, like long, thin fingers. When I looked down, I saw one of the shadows holding my leg. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. That night, the shadow began to pull me out of bed. I could feel its cold fingers tightening around my ankle. The scariest part was that, as it pulled me, I could see more details of its form. It wasn't just a shadow. There was something solid there, something that seemed to have been human once, but was now distorted. I finally managed to scream, and my mom came running into the room. When she turned on the light, the figure disappeared, but left purple marks around my ankle, as if they were darkened fingerprints. It was the first time my mom really saw physical evidence of what was happening to me. After that incident, things drastically worsened. The shadows began to appear in other rooms of the apartment. In the kitchen, they knocked dishes and cutlery off the counters. In the bathroom, the faucet would turn on by itself at night. My mom started to notice that the temperature in the apartment changed drastically in a matter of seconds. Cold spots would form out of nowhere, even with the heater turned up to the maximum. An elderly neighbor from 4B, Mrs. Peterson, who had lived in the building for over 40 years, told us that our apartment had a dark history. In the 1960s, an entire family had died there under mysterious circumstances. The case was never completely solved, but there were suspicions of carbon monoxide poisoning. The manifestations intensified day by day. I began to have terrible nightmares, where I saw people with deformed faces calling me, wanting me to come with them. I would wake up screaming, covered in cold sweat, and frequently find new scratches and marks on my body. My mom, desperate, began seeking help everywhere possible. We consulted priests, mediums, and even a parapsychology professor from Columbia University. Each had a different theory about what was happening, but no one could make the manifestations stop. Professor James Mackenzie from the parapsychology department arrived on a rainy January afternoon. He brought several strange devices: EMF meters, infrared cameras, and audio recorders. As soon as he entered the apartment, his devices started showing abnormal readings, particularly in my room. During his investigation, he discovered something disturbing. Using ground-penetrating radar, he identified a kind of empty chamber beneath the building, directly below my room. After researching the historical records of the municipality, we found out that the building had been constructed over the remains of an old 19th century psychiatric hospital. The professor explained that sometimes places with traumatic histories can create a kind of energy portal, allowing entities of different natures to move between dimensions. According to him, I was particularly sensitive to these energies as a child, acting like a sort of beacon for these entities. One of the most chilling discoveries was when he analyzed the audio recordings made during the night. Amid the static noise, you could clearly hear voices whispering my name and phrases like "come with us" and "you belong to us." The most disturbing part was that some of the voices seemed to belong to children. During his third visit, Professor Mackenzie attempted to perform an energy cleansing session in the apartment. He set up a circle of crystals in the center of the living room and began reciting some ancient prayers. That's when everything spiraled out of control. The lights began to flicker violently, objects flew around the rooms, and a cold wind appeared out of nowhere, even with all the windows closed. At the height of the chaos, I saw something I will never forget. The shadows began to materialize completely. They were no longer just dark shapes. We could see their disfigured faces, twisted limbs, and empty eyes. They moved towards us, leaving a trail of intense cold in their wake. Professor Mackenzie, upon seeing the entities materializing, began shouting orders for my mother to get coarse salt and holy water that he had brought. The entities seemed to be converging into a single point in the room, forming a kind of dark vortex. The air became so thick that it was hard to breathe. It was at that moment that something even more inexplicable happened. One of the entities, which appeared to be a woman in an old, torn and stained nurse's dress, approached me. Unlike the others, her eyes were not empty. They had a reddish, hypnotic glow. She extended her hand towards me, and I felt an irresistible force pulling me toward her. The professor acted quickly, throwing holy water between me and the entity. The liquid began to bubble as if it were boiling upon touching the ground. The nurse let out a piercing, deafening scream that made all the windows in the apartment shake. The other shadows began to writhe and merge into one another, creating a dark, shapeless mass. My mother, following the professor's instructions, began to spread coarse salt at all the entrances of the apartment, doors, windows, and even drains. Professor Mackenzie pulled out an old silver crucifix and started reciting something in Latin. The temperature in the room fluctuated violently. One moment it was freezing, the next suffocatingly hot. The walls began to vibrate, and a strong smell of sulfur filled the air. The professor later explained that this was a sign that the entities were resisting expulsion. He raised the volume of his prayers, and the crucifix in his hands began to emit a bright light. The dark mass of entities began to concentrate in the center of the room, spinning like a tornado in slow motion. Objects flew everywhere: books, cushions, frames from the walls. One of my toy cars narrowly missed the professor's head, almost hitting him. The decisive moment came when Professor Mackenzie, in an act of courage, or perhaps desperation, advanced toward the vortex of entities, holding the crucifix in front of him. The light emanating from the sacred object became even more intense, practically blinding. The entities began to emit horrible sounds, like a mix of screams and wails. The spectral nurse, who seemed to be the leader of that macabre group, made one last charge towards me. My mother, in a maternal impulse, stepped in between me and the entity, holding a rosary that had belonged to my grandmother. The moment she did this, something extraordinary happened. A golden light began to emanate from the rosary, merging with the light of the professor's crucifix. The vortex started to spin faster, but now in the opposite direction. It was as if it were being sucked somewhere. The entities tried to resist, clinging to the walls and furniture, leaving burn marks wherever they touched. The professor continued his prayers, now louder and with more conviction, as sweat dripped down his face. Suddenly, there was an explosion of light, followed by a deafening sound, as if the very air was being torn apart. When we finally managed to open our eyes, it was all over. The apartment was in complete disarray, with furniture overturned and objects scattered everywhere. But the entities had disappeared. Professor Mackenzie explained that we had been able to close the energy portal that existed there. He performed a few more protection rituals in the following days and installed specific crystals at strategic points in the apartment. Since that day, I never saw the shadows again or suffered any kind of attack. Today, years later, I still carry the physical and emotional scars of that experience. Occasionally, I have nightmares about those events, especially with the red-eyed nurse. We moved out of that apartment a few weeks later, and I learned that the building was demolished years later to make way for a new development. Professor Mackenzie kept in touch with us for a few years, using my case in his academic research, with our permission and maintaining our anonymity. He passed away in 2018, taking with him much of the knowledge he had about those supernatural events. But one thing he always told me: some doors, once opened, never fully close. I need to share something scary that happened to me, Pedro, and Anna last month. The three of us are addicted to retro games and are always on the lookout for rare titles for our collection. It all started when we found an ad on Facebook Marketplace about an incredible collection of PS1 games being sold at an unreal price. The seller, who identified himself as Ricardo, lived in an old mansion in the Morumbi neighborhood of São Paulo. It was one of those huge houses from the 60s that gives you chills just by looking at it. We scheduled to meet on a Wednesday night around 8 p.m., as that was the only time he could receive us. We arrived by Uber because none of us had a car. The house was at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by a tall wall covered in ivy. The iron gate made an eerie sound when we opened it. The garden was completely abandoned, with ancient statues covered in moss and a broken fountain in the center. Pedro, who has always been the most excited one in the group, went ahead. Ana, who is sensitive and has always had a strong connection to the supernatural, started to feel uneasy as soon as we stepped onto the property. "Something is wrong here," she whispered, but Pedro and I were so caught up in the excitement about the games that we didn't pay much attention. Ricardo greeted us at the door. He was a tall, very pale man with deep-set eyes and a strange smile. He wore clothes that looked like they were from another era. He led us inside the house, and the smell of mold and something rotten was almost unbearable. The mansion was practically empty, except for a few old pieces of furniture covered with white sheets. "The games are in the basement," he said, pointing to a door under the main staircase. Ana squeezed my arm tightly when Ricardo opened the door. A wooden staircase descended into total darkness. He turned on a single dim light that swung from the basement ceiling, creating dancing shadows on the walls. We descended slowly, the steps creaking beneath our feet. The basement was huge, filled with shelves full of games, but there was something strange in the air. The temperature dropped drastically, and our breath formed small clouds in the air. Ricardo stood at the top of the stairs, watching us with that unsettling smile. That's when we started to hear the voices. At first, they were just distant whispers, but then they became clearer. Ana began to tremble and said she could see people in the shadows, dozens of them, watching us. Pedro, who was examining the games, let out a muffled scream when a cold hand touched his shoulder. When we turned around, we saw an elderly woman wearing an old dress. Her figure was partially transparent, and her feet did not touch the ground. Ana started to cry silently, saying she could feel the pain and suffering of all the souls trapped in that place. The shelves began to shake, and games fell to the ground without anyone touching them. More spirits started to materialize. A group of children in clothes from the last century, a man in a blood-stained suit, a young woman with marks on her neck. They all stared at us with empty eyes and expressions of deep sadness. We ran to the stairs, but the basement door had closed. Ricardo had vanished. We began banging on the door desperately as the spirits drew closer. The air grew denser and colder with each passing second, and a strong smell of decomposition filled the room. Ana, even terrified, began to communicate with the spirits. Through her, we discovered the terrible history of that mansion. In the early 20th century, it was an illegal psychiatric clinic where cruel experiments were conducted. The souls we saw were those of patients who died there, trapped and tortured. Pedro tried to use his cell phone to call for help, but no devices worked in the basement. The lights began to flicker more intensely, and between the flashes, we could see the spirits getting closer. One of the ghost children approached Ana and held her hand. The spot where she was touched turned instantly purple. The man in the blood-stained suit began to tell his story through Ana. He was a doctor who tried to report the abuses of the clinic and was murdered for it. He said that Ricardo was not a real person, but rather the spirit of the former director of the clinic, who lured people to the basement to feed some kind of macabre ritual. The walls began to ooze a dark, viscous liquid, and sounds of screams and cries echoed throughout the space. The temperature continued to drop, and our bodies trembled uncontrollably. Pedro, who had always been the most skeptical in the group, was in shock, murmuring prayers his grandmother had taught him. Ana, using her spiritual sensitivity, began to guide a deeper communication with the spirits. The elderly woman in the old dress approached and, through Ana, explained that there was a way to escape, but we needed to help them first. She revealed that beneath the basement floor lay the remains of several victims who had never been found, and their souls could not rest until their remains were properly buried. Pedro, still trembling, found a spot on the floor that sounded hollow when we stepped on it. Using a rusty crowbar we found among the shelves, we began to lift the floorboards. What we found underneath was horrifying. Dozens of human skeletons, some still with pieces of deteriorated clothing. The spirits became increasingly agitated as we revealed their remains. The air grew so thick that we could barely breathe. The ghost child who had touched Anna began to sing a disturbing lullaby, and all the other spirits joined in a supernatural chorus that made the walls vibrate. Suddenly, we heard heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. It was Ricardo, but his appearance had changed completely. Now he looked like a deformed being, with grey skin and completely black eyes. He carried an ancient book and began to recite words in an unknown language. Anna shouted that we needed to stop him from completing the ritual. According to her, he was trying to use our life energy to keep the souls trapped there forever. In a desperate act of courage, Pedro ran and snatched the book from Ricardo's hands. The moment the book hit the ground, an intense light emerged from the exposed bones. The spirits began to move toward Ricardo, who for the first time showed fear. The elderly woman in the old dress led the group, her figure now emanating a bluish light. Ricardo tried to escape, but the souls surrounded him. His body began to dissolve like smoke as he screamed in a voice that did not sound human. The temperature started to rise gradually, and the walls stopped oozing that dark liquid. Anna fell to her knees, exhausted from the intense connection with the spiritual world. The spirits of the children began to disappear one by one, their faces now showing peace instead of sadness. The elderly woman in the dress approached Anna one last time and, through her, thanked us for freeing the trapped souls. She explained that they could finally rest in peace, but warned us that some places hold such dense energies that they continue to attract supernatural manifestations even after the spirits are freed. When the last spirit disappeared, the basement door opened on its own. We ran up the stairs, still in shock from everything that had happened. The mansion looked different. It seemed older, more deteriorated, as if we had lived in two different temporal dimensions during our stay in the basement. We stepped out into the garden and noticed that several hours had passed. It was almost dawn. Our cell phones started working again, showing dozens of missed calls from our worried families. Pedro had deep scratches on his back, resembling claw marks. Anna had a high fever and that purple mark on her hand where the ghost child had touched her. In the following days, we began researching the history of the mansion. We discovered in old newspapers that there really was a clandestine psychiatric clinic there in the 1920s. The director, Dr. Ricardo Mendez, had mysteriously disappeared after reports of mistreatment of patients. The photos in the historical archives showed exactly the same man who had received us. Anna continued to have visions and nightmares with the children from the basement. She said they were still trying to communicate, as if they wanted to warn us about something. Pedro developed a terrible fear of enclosed spaces and started sleeping with the lights on. I began to notice shadows in the corners of my house and heard that lullaby at random moments. A week later, we returned to the mansion during the day, accompanied by the police and a group of archaeologists. The bones were found exactly where we had seen them, and an investigation was opened. More than 50 bodies were identified, including children and adults, all showing signs of violent death. The most disturbing discovery was finding, among the remains, a skeleton wearing a suit with a medical badge, the remains of the real Dr. Ricardo Mendez. Next to the body was the same ancient book that Pedro had torn from his spectral hands, but now completely deteriorated and illegible. Today, 6 months after the incident, we still deal with the consequences of that night. The mansion was demolished after the remains were removed, and a memorial was built on the site in honor of the victims. Anna became a respected medium, helping others facing supernatural issues. Pedro decided to study parapsychology to better understand what we experienced. The games we saw in the basement were never found. It was as if they had disappeared along with the spirits. Curiously, each of us received a single unlabeled PlayStation tape at home. When we tried to play it, the screen showed only static and that lullaby the children sang in the basement. The physical marks remained. The purple mark on Anna's hand never completely disappeared, and the scratches on Pedro's back turned into scars that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. I developed a special sensitivity. I can feel when there are supernatural presences nearby. Recently, we discovered that other people had also been drawn to the mansion over the years, always with the promise of finding something valuable. Some disappeared, others went mad. We found a Facebook group of survivors sharing experiences similar to ours. The case gained media attention and interest from paranormal researchers. Documentaries were made, books were written, but none truly captured the terror we experienced that night. Police investigations continue, revealing more and more dark details about the history of the clinic and its patients. Anna says that she sometimes still receives visits from the children in her dreams, but now they seem at peace, playing in a sunny garden. Pedro kept the deteriorated book in a blessed glass box, which he keeps in his office as a reminder of our experience. As for me, I could never play video games again without thinking about that night. The lesson we learned is that there are boundaries between worlds that should not be crossed. Sometimes a simple search for old games can lead us to discover terrible truths about the past and the nature of reality. Today, we are more cautious with our searches for rarities, always researching the history of the places and people involved. The mansion may have been demolished, but its story and the souls that suffered there will never be forgotten. And the three of us, united by that supernatural experience, continued to seek answers to the questions that night left us with, knowing that some of them may never be answered.
My name is Thomas Reeves. I have been a truck driver for over 15 years, traversing the roads of the United States from coast to coast. What I am about to recount happened in October 2019 on a particularly cold night on a secondary road in the state of Montana near the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. It was around 11:40 p.m. when I decided to take a shortcut via Route 89, a less traveled road that cuts through a mountainous area. The sky was exceptionally dark that night with no moon and dense clouds blocking any natural light. My GPS indicated that I still had about 4 hours of travel until my destination in Great Falls. The road was completely deserted, which was not unusual for that time and region. My headlights were the only source of light within a radius of miles, and the radio began to experience interference, alternating between static and distorted fragments of country songs. At first, I didn't think much of it. Radio interference is common in remote areas. That's when I noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. A faint, greenish light seemed to hover a few feet above the asphalt, following my truck. At first, I thought it was a reflection from another vehicle, but that was impossible. There was no one else on the road besides me. The light began to approach, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The air inside the cabin suddenly became colder, so much so that I could see my own breath. The dashboard of the truck started to flicker inexplicably, and the engine, which had always been reliable, began to sputter. I tried to remain calm, but my heart was racing faster and faster. The greenish light was now practically beside the truck, and for the first time, I saw something that left me in shock. Through the passenger window, I saw a translucent humanoid figure with features that seemed to belong to an ancient Native American. Its expression was one of deep sadness, and its eyes seemed to hold all the pain of the world. At that moment, my truck simply stopped. It wasn't a gradual halt. The engine died instantly, as if all power had been sucked away. I sat there stranded in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by absolute darkness and that supernatural presence. The being began to manifest more clearly. Now I could see details of its traditional garments, adornments, and body paint that glowed with that same greenish light. It didn't move like a normal human. It seemed to float, and its form wavered like smoke in the wind. I tried to turn on the CB radio to call for help, but I could only hear an ancient, distant voice speaking in a language I didn't understand. The air grew colder, and I began to feel an inexplicable pressure in my chest, as if something were trying to communicate something important to me. The entity began to manifest more intensely. Through the frost-covered glass, I saw that other figures were beginning to emerge around the truck. They were silhouettes similar to the first, all with that same greenish glow forming a circle around my vehicle. My mind was trying to rationalize what was happening, but there was no logical explanation. The digital clock on the dashboard flickered repeatedly, showing 0, regardless of the actual time. The air inside the cabin was so frigid that small ice crystals began to form at the edges of the windshield. It was then that I began to hear it. They weren't normal voices, but rather an ancestral chant that seemed to come from all directions. It was a sad, ancient melody that, even without understanding the words, conveyed a deep sense of loss and lament. My whole body trembled, and it wasn't just from the cold. The main figure, the one I had seen first, moved closer to the passenger window. Its spectral hand passed through the glass as if it didn't exist. And at that moment, a series of visions flooded my mind. I saw images of a pristine land, untouched by modern civilization, people living in harmony with nature, and then I saw the destruction. I saw conflicts, diseases, death, and despair. I understood that I was witnessing the history of that people, their memories, their pain. The place where I had stopped was not just a stretch of road. It was an ancient sacred territory of the Blackfeet, a place where traumatic events had occurred over 2 centuries ago. The visions continued, becoming more intense. I saw ancient ceremonies taking place exactly where my truck was parked, warriors defending their lands, families being decimated by diseases brought by settlers. Each image was like a stab of guilt and sorrow in my chest. The singing grew louder, and the figures began to perform what seemed to be an ancient ritual dance. Their movements were fluid, almost hypnotic, and the greenish light they emitted created complex patterns in the night air. The ground beneath the truck began to vibrate slightly. I tried to reach for my cell phone to record what was happening, but the device was completely dead, just like all the electronic systems in the truck. It was as if all modern technology was incompatible with that ancestral manifestation. The temperature continued to drop, and I could feel that something even more significant was about to happen. The spectral figures were now moving in perfect synchrony, and the air seemed to carry an ancient and powerful energy that made my hair stand on end. Suddenly, all the figures stopped their movements simultaneously. The silence that followed was deafening, more disturbing than any sound I had ever heard. The main figure, which still held eye contact with me, began to emit a brighter glow, and then something extraordinary happened. The scenery around me began to change. It was as if time was reversing before my eyes. The paved road disappeared, giving way to a dirt trail. The trees around seemed younger, more alive, and the sky was different, free from the light pollution we know today. I saw a Blackfeet camp materializing around the truck. Traditional teepees appeared out of nowhere. Children ran and played. Elders sat in a circle around a campfire. It was like being in a historical movie, except everything felt terribly real. I could smell the smoke, hear the voices, feel the life pulsing in that community. But then the scene changed. drastically. The sky darkened, and I began to witness the moment when that sacred place was violated. I saw soldiers arriving, I saw conflicts, I saw diseases spreading. The images were so vivid that they made me feel physically ill. Tears streamed down my face as I witnessed that historical tragedy. The main entity was now inside the cab with me. There was no longer a physical barrier between us. Its face was inches from mine, and its eyes, those eyes held centuries of history and suffering. I felt a deep connection, as if I was receiving not just memories, but also emotions and ancestral knowledge. It was then that I understood the purpose of that encounter. They were not there to scare me or harm me. They were there to share their story, to ensure that their memory would not be forgotten. They wanted someone from the modern era to witness what had happened in that sacred place. The spirit began to speak to me in English, its voice sounding like thousands of overlapping whispers. You have been chosen to be a witness. Carry our story. Tell others. This place is sacred. Do not let it be forgotten. Slowly, the visions began to dissipate. The spectral figures faded away one by one, leaving only the main entity. It made one last gesture, touched my forehead with its ethereal fingers. At that moment, I felt a surge of energy pass through my body, and all the memories of what I had witnessed solidified in my mind with crystalline clarity. When the entity finally withdrew, the entire electrical system of the truck came back to life instantly. The engine started on its own, the radio began to work again, and my phone showed 3:33 a.m. Almost 4 hours had passed, although to me it felt like only a few minutes had gone by. Trembling and still trying to process everything that had happened, I drove to the nearest town, Browning, which was about 12 miles away. Throughout the journey, I kept my eyes fixed on the road, fearing to look in the rearview mirror and see those figures again. The rest of the trip was a blur of conflicting thoughts and emotions. When I arrived in Browning, I stopped at the first gas station I found open. The attendant, an elderly Blackfeet man, looked at me strangely as if he knew exactly what I had just experienced. As I tried to compose myself with a hot coffee, he approached and said quietly, "You saw them, didn't you? The Guardians of the Valley?" Surprised by his question, I just nodded. The man, who introduced himself as John Running Bear, told me that that stretch of Route 89 was known among his people as the Spirit Way. According to him, only chosen people could see the Guardians, and this happened when the spirits felt they needed to share their story. John explained to me that the place where I stopped was an ancient sacred cemetery where hundreds of his ancestors were buried during a smallpox epidemic in the 19th century. The government never officially recognized the site as sacred land, and the road was built over it in the 1950s, ignoring the protests of the indigenous community. In the days that followed, I began to notice changes in myself. I started having vivid dreams with the people I had seen in the visions. I began to understand words in Blackfeet without ever having studied the language. Even stranger, I developed an inexplicable sensitivity to historical places. I could feel the energy and memories embedded in certain locations. 3 months after the incident, I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox. Inside was an old tribal necklace and a piece of paper with geographic coordinates. When I researched, I discovered that the coordinates pointed to other sacred sites of the Blackfeet, some of them not officially documented. Today, 5 years after that supernatural night, my life has changed completely. I have stopped being just a truck driver and have become an active advocate for Indigenous rights. I use my experience to raise awareness about the importance of preserving and respecting Native American sacred sites. I have returned several times to that stretch of Route 89, always at night. Although I have never witnessed such an intense manifestation as the first time, I still feel a different energy there. Sometimes I see distant greenish lights or hear fragments of that ancestral chant in the wind. The most astonishing thing is that I am not alone in this experience. After sharing my story in closed trucker groups, I received dozens of similar accounts from other drivers who passed through that region. Some described the same spirits, others reported different yet equally significant experiences. In 2022, I managed to organize a movement that led to an archaeological study in the area. The findings confirmed the presence of an ancient indigenous cemetery at the site. There is currently a process underway to officially recognize the site as sacred territory of the Blackfeet and possibly reroute that stretch of road. John Running Bear, the gas station attendant, has become a great friend and mentor. He taught me a lot about Blackfeet culture and helped me better understand the meaning of that supernatural encounter. According to him, spirits carefully choose their witnesses, and being chosen carries a great responsibility. I still drive my truck, but now I choose routes that pass through indigenous lands and historical sites. I keep a detailed journal of all the sensations and experiences I have in these places. The necklace I mysteriously received never leaves my neck, and sometimes when I touch it, I receive flashes of memories that are not mine, glimpses of a life and a culture that existed long before our modern times. The experience completely changed my perspective on life, death, and our connection to the past. I learned that there are truths and realities beyond our modern understanding, and that the spirits of those who came before us still have much to teach us. For those traveling along Route 89 in Montana, especially at night, pay attention. If you see greenish lights or feel an inexplicable chill, know that you may have been chosen as I was. And if you are, remember, they are not there to scare, but to share and preserve a story that cannot be forgotten.
My name is Fabiano, and I never imagined that a simple search for my son's dog would turn into the most terrifying nightmare of my life. It all began on an October afternoon in Los Angeles when Max, the 2-year-old golden retriever we gave to Tommy on his birthday, vanished while playing in the backyard of our home in the Silver Lake suburb. Tommy, my 8-year-old son, was inconsolable. As a father, seeing those little tear-filled eyes broke my heart. I promised him that I would find Max, not knowing that this promise would lead me to the depths of horror. We started a search around the neighborhood, handing out flyers and asking neighbors. It was then that Mrs. Martinez, an elderly lady who lived 2 blocks down, told me something disturbing. According to her, she had seen Max running toward that old abandoned Victorian mansion on Riverside Drive. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that place, the infamous Reynolds house. The stories about that property were as diverse and frightening as possible. For the past 30 years, the place had become a meeting point for dark activities. I confess that, despite being a skeptical 42-year-old man and a manager at a technology company, I felt a shiver when I parked my car in front of the mansion. The sun was setting, painting the sky a blood red that seemed like a portent. The 3-story building loomed like a grotesque shadow against the horizon, its broken windows appearing like empty eyes watching me. Equipped only with a flashlight and my cell phone, I began to circle the property. The garden was covered in dead and twisted vegetation, and ancient statues of angels with disfigured faces seemed to follow my every step. It was then that I heard a distant bark coming from inside the house. "Max!" I shouted, feeling my heart race. The bark repeated, weaker this time, as if it came from the basement. Against all good sense, I headed for the front entrance. The heavy oak door was ajar, creaking ominously with the breeze of the night that was beginning to fall. The interior of the mansion was a monument to decay. The once elegant wallpaper hung from the walls in rotten strips. The floor was covered with a thick layer of dust, except for a few recent footprints, some clearly from a dog, others I preferred not to try to identify at that moment. Following the barks, I found the door to the basement. The old wooden staircase descended into absolute darkness. The beam from my flashlight revealed steps covered in a dark, sticky substance. The smell coming from below was a mix of mold, decay, and something else. Something that made my stomach turn. It was then that I heard Max's bark again. Now, clearer, mixed with a sound I would never forget. A low, guttural chant in a language I did not recognize. My reason screamed for me to turn back, call the police, do anything but descend those stairs. But the thought of Tommy waiting at home for his beloved Max gave me the courage, or foolishness, to continue. As I descended the steps, each footfall made the old wood creak beneath me. The air grew denser and heavier, as if it were laden with something beyond the mere humidity of the basement. My flashlight began to flicker, blinking irregularly, making the descent even more terrifying. When I finally reached the basement, what I saw made me freeze. The basement was much larger than I expected, with several tunnels branching off in different directions. The walls were covered in strange symbols painted with a substance that looked like dried blood. Complex circles were drawn on the concrete. Floor and half-melted candles were scattered throughout the space. The chant I had heard abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water and footsteps? Yes, footsteps that were not mine, echoing somewhere in that underground maze. Max barked again, the sound coming from one of the tunnels to my right. "Max, boy, where are you?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. I began to move down the tunnel, noticing that the walls were covered with makeshift shelves. On them were glass jars containing things I prefer not to describe in detail. Some seemed to move when the light from my flashlight hit them. The tunnel opened into a larger circular room. In the center there was a kind of stone altar stained with dark substances that formed horrible patterns. Max was there, chained, in one corner of the room, whimpering softly. I ran to him, my heart pounding like a crazed drum. As I approached Max, I noticed he was different. His golden fur was stained black in places, and his eyes had a reddish hue I had never seen before. He kept staring at a specific point behind me, growling softly. It was then that I heard them. Voices. Dozens of them. Whispering in an ancient and forbidden language. The air grew even heavier, and a greenish mist began to form in the room. The candles scattered around the room lit themselves one by one, revealing shadows that moved impossibly on the walls. "Welcome, Fabiano," a deep, distorted voice echoed behind me. "We have been waiting for you." Slowly, I turned. What I saw at that moment defied all logic and sanity. 5 hooded figures emerged from the shadows, their black robes seeming to absorb the light from the candles. But it was not their clothing that terrified me. It was what was beneath their hoods. Where there should have been human faces, there was only darkness and 2 glowing red points that served as eyes. "Your dog was merely the bait," the central figure continued. "We needed someone with your potential." At that moment, my survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed Max with all the strength I could muster, tearing away the chains that bound him. The metal gave way with a chilling ease, as if it were made of paper. The hooded figures began to move towards me, their movements erratic and unnatural, as if their bodies had no bones. "The transformation has already begun," said another voice, this time feminine and melodic, but with a tone that sent chills through my blood. "Look at your hands, Fabiano." Against my will, I looked. My veins were dark and pulsing, visible through skin that was starting to take on a grayish hue. Panic overtook me when I realized that the superhuman strength I had used to free Max was not normal. Without a second thought, I picked Max up and ran toward the exit. The figures did not try to physically stop me, but began a chant that made the walls vibrate. Pieces of the ceiling started to crumble, and that greenish mist grew denser. As I ran through the tunnels, the images in the jars seemed to come alive. Distorted faces pressed against the glass, mouths opening in silent screams. The ground beneath, my feet began to move as if it were alive, trying to pull me down. I reached the stairs and ascended 3 steps at a time, still carrying Max. My body felt stronger, more agile, but I also sensed something dark growing inside me. When we reached the main floor of the mansion, I saw that the sun had completely set and the house was engulfed in darkness. The garden statues had changed position, all facing the door like silent sentinels. I ran to my car, threw Max onto the passenger seat, and turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th attempt, it finally started. As I accelerated away from that cursed place, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The 5 figures stood at the mansion door, their red eyes glowing in the darkness. One of them raised a hand in a farewell gesture, and I could swear it was smiling, even without a visible face. I arrived home, trembling. Tommy was overjoyed to see Max, but something was wrong. The dog was not the same anymore, and honestly, neither was I. The dark marks on my veins had not disappeared, and sometimes, late at night, I could hear those chants echoing in my mind. 3 months have passed since that day. Max no longer barks, he just watches the shadows with his red eyes. Tommy doesn't notice, but my wife Sarah senses that something has changed. She catches me staring blankly into space, murmuring words, in a language that even I don't understand. And every night in my dreams, those hooded figures call me back. They say that the transformation is not complete, that I need to return to the mansion to finalize the ritual. The worst part is that with each passing day, I feel more compelled to heed the call. Last week, things started to deteriorate drastically. I wake up every morning with strange symbols scratched on the walls of my room, symbols identical to those I saw in the mansion's basement. Sarah is terrified, especially after she found Max sitting in Tommy's room during the night, completely still, his red eyes fixed on our sleeping son. I decided to seek help. I found an occult specialist, Professor Martinez, who teaches at UCLA. When I showed him photos of the symbols and told him my story, his face went pale. According to him, I had become involved with something very ancient and dangerous, a cult that has existed for millennia, known as the Guardians of the Veil. According to the professor, they seek specific hosts for an ancient entity, something that exists between dimensions. The ritual in the basement was just the beginning of a gradual possession process. Max was not just bait. He was the first to be transformed, a guardian designated to keep me on the path of complete transformation. Last night, I had the worst episode yet. I woke up in the backyard, covered in dirt, with ritualistic symbols, drawn in blood around me. The most frightening thing was that it wasn't my blood. In my hands, I found feathers and small bones, remains of birds and animals from the garden. Max was sitting beside me, his eyes redder than ever, as if approving of my actions. Sarah took Tommy and went to her mother's house. I can't blame her. I'm losing control more frequently. The voices are constant now, and sometimes I catch myself responding to them in a language that seems as old as time itself. My reflection in the mirror looks different. Sometimes I see one of the hooded figures staring back at me. Professor Martinez is trying to find a purification ritual, but he says we need to hurry. According to him, on the next full moon, which will be in 3 days, the transformation will be irreversible. He warned me that the Guardians of the Veil would likely come to take me before then. I am writing this account as a record in case something happens to me. If you are reading this, please stay away from the mansion on Riverside Drive. And if you see a golden retriever with red eyes wandering around Los Angeles, do not follow it, no matter how friendly it seems. I can hear Max barking downstairs now, but it's no longer a normal bark. It's that same chant I heard in the basement. The shadows in my office are moving oddly, and my veins, they are almost completely black now. I feel like they are coming to get me. There's something scratching at my door right now. It's not Max. The sound is coming from upstairs and I'm on the second floor. The air is becoming heavy, with that same greenish mist beginning to form. My hand is trembling as I write these last words, but it's not from fear, it's from anticipation. The door to my office just opened. The 5 hooded figures are here, just like the first time. But now, I no longer feel fear. It's as if a part of me has been waiting for this moment. Max is beside them, his red eyes brighter than ever. "It's time, Fabiano," says the central figure. "The veil awaits." My hands tremble as I write these last words. Professor Martinez just sent me a message. He discovered something terrible. The Guardians of the Veil do not choose just one host at a time. They need a complete family. Tommy. My God, Tommy was the final target. Max and I were merely the first steps. Now I understand why Sarah had that urgency to take Tommy away. It wasn't just my behavior that scared her. It was her maternal instinct detecting something much more sinister approaching. The marks I found in his room were not for protection, as I initially thought. They were marks of preparation. Professor Martinez is on his way with a team of occultists, but I know they won't arrive in time. The transformation is almost complete. I can feel my body changing, my consciousness expanding to places that the human mind shouldn't reach. The walls of the office are dissolving into shadows, and through them I can see things. Different realities. Worlds beyond the veil. To whoever finds this account, protect your children. The Guardians are always seeking new families to complete their eternal circle. They are patient, they can wait decades. A lost dog, an abandoned house, anything can be the beginning of their approach. Sarah, if you read this, I'm sorry. Keep Tommy safe. Don't go back to Los Angeles. Don't trust any pets, especially those with unusual eyes. And if you ever find Max, run. The figures are surrounding me now. The air is so thick that I can hardly breathe. I see the veil opening, a lie in reality revealing a place beyond human comprehension. It's indescribable, beautiful, and horrifying at the same time. My last words as Fabiano. May this account serve as a warning. There are ancient things in this world, things that use our love against ourselves. A parent's love for their child, the affection for a pet, they are merely doors that they use to enter our lives.
Hello, my name is Sarah Thompson, and I want to share something terrifying that happened to me in Los Angeles during the terrible wildfires of 2024. I work as a freelance photographer and was documenting the fires in the Angeles National Forest area near San Fernando Valley. It was around 7:30 p.m. on October 15th. The sky was a frightening orange hue due to the smoke from the fires. I was positioned in an elevated area in La Tuna Canyon, trying to capture some photos of the advancing fire when everything began. The temperature was absurdly high, about 105 degrees to 40 degrees, even though it was nighttime. Suddenly, I noticed something strange in the sky. Initially, I thought they were firefighter helicopters, but the movement patterns were completely different. 3 lights in a triangular formation hovered over the burning area. They emitted a pulsating bluish glow that seemed to communicate with the flames below. The scariest part was when I realized the fire began to behave unnaturally. The flames formed perfect geometric patterns, as if they were being controlled. I managed to photograph everything, but when I tried to review the images on the camera, they appeared distorted, with strange pixelated patterns. That's when the real terror began. The temperature dropped drastically in a matter of seconds. My car, which was parked about 50 meters away from me, started beeping frantically, all the lights flashing uncontrollably. My cell phone died instantly, even with 98% battery. I heard a deep humming, so intense it made my bones vibrate. The 3 lights in the sky began to expand, and a kind of greenish mist descended to the ground. The fire, instead of retreating with this mist, seemed to dance with it, creating huge spirals that rose hundreds of meters into the air. I tried to run to my car, but my muscles felt paralyzed. That's when I saw something emerge from the mist. Humanoid silhouettes, but definitely not human. They were extremely tall, about 10 feet, incredibly thin, with disproportionately long limbs. Their heads were elongated, and where their eyes should have been, there was only a luminescent strip pulsating in sync with the lights in the sky. These creatures seemed to be harvesting something from the fire. Their long fingers made fluid movements, and the flames responded as if they were liquid. The most disturbing thing was the absolute silence that settled in. Even the crackling of the fire could not be heard, just that deep, penetrating hum. I managed, with great effort, to grab my cell phone and try to record, but the device was completely dead. My legs were shaking, and I felt a mix of terror and fascination. The creatures seemed to be performing some kind of ritual with the fire, and with each of their movements, the flames changed colour, going through shades I didn't even know fire could assume. What happened next still haunts me to this day. One of the creatures noticed my presence and turned its head in my direction. There was no facial expression, but I felt an overwhelming mental pressure, as if something was rummaging through my memories. Images began to flash in my mind, visions of Los Angeles in flames, but they were not the current fires. They seemed to be from the future. I saw the city completely transformed. Giant crystalline structures emerged from the burned rubble, and the sky had a perpetual purplish-green hue. The most disturbing thing was the symbols that appeared repeatedly in the visions, complex geometric patterns that seemed to change shape when you tried to focus on them. The creature began to approach me. Its movements were too fluid to be natural, as if it were gliding through the air. With each step it took toward me, the air became denser and electrified. My hair was standing on end, and I tasted metal in my mouth. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. That's when I noticed other people starting to appear in the area. They were firefighters and rescue teams who had probably come to check this part of the hillside. However, they seemed to be in some kind of trance. They walked mechanically, their eyes completely black, reflecting the strange lights in the sky. The creature stopped about 2 meters away from me and extended one of its long fingers in my direction. The moment it did this, all the flames within a radius of kilometers extinguished simultaneously, leaving only pulsating embers that formed those same symbols I saw in my visions. The silence was broken by a sharp sound, like thousands of voices whispering at once. The other 2 creatures joined the first one, and I realized they were engaging in some kind of communication with each other. The entranced firefighters formed a circle around us, still with that empty black gaze. Suddenly I felt something being inserted into my mind. It wasn't exactly words or images, but a deep and terrifying understanding. These beings were not here by chance. The fires were part of a larger process, a planned transformation of our environment. I saw through their eyes for a moment, as I experienced that nearly drove me insane. Our reality was just a thin layer over something much vaster and incomprehensible. The fires were portals, contact points between our dimension and theirs, and they were using the fire to alter the very structure of reality in Los Angeles. One of the entranced firefighters began to speak, but their voice was not human. It was as if multiple voices were speaking simultaneously, in different tones and languages. The message was clear. The process has begun. The transformation is waited, inevitable. Los Angeles will be the epicenter. What happened in the following hours completely changed my perception of reality. The creatures began a process that I can only describe as dimensional harvesting. The air around us began to crystallize, forming impossible geometric structures that floated and intersected. The firefighters in a trance began to perform synchronized movements like a macabre dance. Their bodies emitted a greenish light through their pores, and their shadows moved independently, slithering across the ground like living creatures. The smell in the air changed drastically. It was a mix of ozone with something organic and alien, impossible to describe in human words. That was when I noticed something even more disturbing. Small energy vortices began to form at the spot where the flames had been. From these vortices emerged what appeared to be fragments of other realities. I saw distorted versions of Los Angeles. In some, the city was made entirely of living crystal. In others, pulsing biomechanical structures replaced the skyscrapers. The creatures began to extract something from these vortices, a substance that seemed both liquid and gaseous, glowing with colours my human eyes had never seen before. Every time they collected this substance, I felt a ripple in reality itself, as if the fabric of space-time was being stretched and twisted. I tried to move, but my body felt trapped in some kind of invisible force field. That was when I realised I was no longer breathing, not in the conventional sense. It was as if the air had transformed into something denser, more informative. Every molecule that entered my lungs carried data, memories and sensations that did not belong to me. One of the trance-bound firefighters approached me and began to speak in a voice that seemed to come from multiple dimensions simultaneously. "You have been chosen as a witness. What you are witnessing is just the beginning. Los Angeles is a nexus, a point of convergence. The fires are merely the catalyst for something much greater." The creatures then began an even more bizarre process. Their bodies started to unfold into impossible angles, revealing geometries that made my mind scream in protest. It was as if they were transforming into living portals, connecting our reality to something far beyond human comprehension. The sky above us began to tear apart, revealing a void that was not black, but filled with infinite fractal patterns that moved and pulsed as if they were alive. The city lights began to flicker, not just blinking but changing position, as if the very urban geography was being rewritten. I felt something being implanted in my memory, information, symbols, and knowledge that no human being should possess. I saw the true purpose of the fires. They were not destruction, but transformation. Each flame was a code, each ember a cosmic program being executed to rewrite the matrix of reality. The creatures finally finished their bizarre ritual, but what they left behind was only the beginning. Los Angeles would never be the same, and I knew I had become part of something much larger and more terrible than I could imagine. In the months that followed that night, Los Angeles began to manifest subtle but deeply disturbing changes. First, there were the collective dreams. Thousands of people reported having the same night visions, crystalline structures emerging from the ground, alien symbols pulsing on the walls of buildings, and the sky opening up to reveal overlapping realities. I began to notice that the areas affected by the fires were not recovering normally. The vegetation that grew was different, plants with impossible geometries, flowers that emitted their own light at night, and trees whose shadows moved in the opposite direction of the sun. Scientists trying to study these anomalies frequently disappeared or were found in a catatonic state, mumbling about interdimensional patterns. In January 2025, the first fold events began to occur. People reported entering a building in THIAGO, downtown LA, and exiting in alternative versions of the city. Some returned different, their eyes glowing with a greenish hue similar to that of the creatures I saw, their words laden with impossible knowledge about the nature of reality. The most frightening part was how the authorities seemed to deliberately ignore these occurrences. When I tried to publish my photos and accounts, I encountered an invisible yet powerful resistance. Files mysteriously disappeared, emails self-corrupted, and recordings turned into static noise. It was as if something was actively suppressing any evidence of what was happening. The firefighters who had been present that night were never the same. I found some of them months later, Their movements were different, more fluid, almost inhuman. They spoke about their work with an impossible technical knowledge, describing fire not as an element, but as a tool for dimensional reconfiguration. On certain nights, when the moon is in a specific phase, the crystalline structures I saw in my visions begin to partially materialize, like semi-transparent holograms overlaying the existing buildings. Sensitive people can see them, and many report feeling a mental pressure, similar to what I experienced during my encounter with the creatures. The fires continued, but with a different pattern. They followed precise geometric shapes when viewed from above, and the flames sometimes seemed to freeze in time, creating fire sculptures that lasted for hours. Rescue teams reported finding symbols etched into the burned ground, the same ones that had been implanted in my mind that night. Technology began to behave erratically in the city. GPS devices were showing impossible locations, phones were picking up conversations from other dimensions, and security cameras were occasionally capturing images of a different Los Angeles. Superimposed over ours, a city of crystal and light, inhabited by forms that defied human comprehension. I discovered that I was not alone in my experiences. A secret group of witnesses formed, people who had similar encounters during the fires. We would gather in safe locations to share information and try to understand what was happening to our city. In recent weeks, our findings have become even more alarming. Through our network of witnesses, we identified that Los Angeles was not chosen by chance. The city is built on an ancient nexus of energy that Native American peoples already knew of and avoided. The fires and the creatures are using these power points for something much larger. At our last secret meeting, held in a modified basement with special protections in Echo Park, one of the witnesses, a former Caltech physicist, presented data showing that the very atomic structure of the air in LA is changing. The space between the molecules is expanding impossibly, creating pockets where the laws of physics do not fully apply. The most disturbing thing is that we began to notice changes in ourselves. Those who witnessed the events developed strange abilities. Some can see through the layers of reality, others can predict exactly where and when the next folding events will occur. I myself realized that I can understand the alien symbols that appear during the fires. They are a cosmic programming language. Last week, during a new fire in Griffith Park, we managed to document something extraordinary. The creatures returned, but this time they were building something. Using fire as a tool, they were literally weaving a new matrix of reality over the city. We saw how each flame was precisely positioned, creating a complex network of energy that is slowly transforming Los Angeles into something that is not entirely of this universe. The trance-like firefighters now seem to be part of a larger hierarchy. They act as intermediaries between the creatures and our reality, preparing specific locations for future transformations. We discovered that some of them no longer sleep and can spend entire days performing complex calculations that seem to predict where the next dimensional alterations will occur. The most frightening thing is that we identified a temporal pattern. All significant events happen at mathematically precise intervals, following a sequence that points to a specific date in the near future, June 21st, 2025, the summer solstice. Our analyses suggest that this will be the moment of a final convergence. Some witnesses have begun to mysteriously disappear. Others have been found in altered states of consciousness, their minds seemingly connected to other dimensions. Those who remain are divided between those who see this transformation as a necessary evolution, and others who believe we need to stop this process before it is too late. I keep this record in the hope that someone will understand the true magnitude of what is happening in Los Angeles. The city is not just changing, it is transforming into a portal, a point of transition between realities. The fires, the UFOs, the creatures, all are part of a larger plan to rewrite the very nature of reality. If you are reading this, know that Los Angeles is no longer just a city. It is the epicenter of a cosmic transformation that will affect all of humanity. The signs are everywhere, for those who know where to look. The creatures continue their silent work, and each new fire brings us closer to the final moment of transformation. This is my final testimony. whatever happens on June 21st, 2025, will forever change our understanding of what is real. Los Angeles will be ground zero for a new era. The question remains whether we will be prepared for what is to come.
Dude, I need to share something surreal that happened to me when I was working as security at Allianz Parque in São Paulo. It was October 2023, on a Wednesday night after a Palmeiras game. I'm Carlos, and I've been working as security in stadiums for 8 years, but I had never witnessed anything like this. That night, Neymar was visiting the stadium after the game for a special recording. It was around 11:40 p.m, and I was doing my normal rounds in the west section. The stadium was practically empty, with only a few cleaning and production teams still working. Suddenly, I received a call over the radio. It was João, my supervisor, saying that Neymar had disappeared. Yes, you heard it right, disappeared. His team was frantically searching everywhere. He had gone to the bathroom near the locker rooms and hadn't returned. Immediately, we started a search throughout the stadium. The security cameras showed him entering the bathroom at 11:35 p.m, but they didn't capture his exit. It was as if he had evaporated. The strangest part was that this particular bathroom had always been known among the staff for unexplained happenings. Some colleagues had reported strange noises, doors slamming shut on their own, and even shadows. I had always been skeptical about these stories, but what happened that night completely changed my perspective. When I entered the bathroom to look for him, I immediately felt a change in temperature. It was absurdly cold, something totally abnormal for a warm October night in São Paulo. The lights started flickering, and I swear I heard distant laughter as if it was coming from the walls. The most frightening part was when we found Neymar's cell phone lying near the last stall. The screen was still on, showing a half-taken selfie that he apparently tried to take. In the photo, you could partially see a dark figure behind him. The entire security team was in a panic. It had been 40 minutes since his disappearance. We discreetly called in some paranormal experts who usually provide support to the stadium in, let's say, unusual situations. During the investigation, we discovered that that specific area of the stadium was built over an ancient indigenous cemetery. According to historical records, that land had a very strong energy and was considered sacred by the people who lived there in the 18th century. The experts began a spiritual communication process, while we kept everything absolutely confidential to avoid panic and unnecessary exposure. The situation was getting more tense, and time was not helping at all. The tension just kept rising. It was past midnight when we began to hear rhythmic knocks coming from the bathroom walls. The paranormal experts, Dona Célia and her son Marcos, lit candles and began a protection ritual. The atmosphere was so heavy that some security guards refused to stay in the area. Then something even weirder happened. The bathroom lights started flickering wildly, and a cold wind appeared out of nowhere, even with all the windows closed. The most astonishing thing was that we could clearly hear Neymar's voice calling for help, but it seemed to be coming from all directions at once. Dona Célia, a lady in her 70s with decades of experience in supernatural cases, explained that that place was a dimensional portal. According to her, at certain moments, especially during a full moon, which was the case that night, the barrier between our world and the spiritual one became thinner. The medium began to go into a trance and revealed that Neymar was trapped in a kind of parallel dimension, a place between worlds. According to her, the spirits of the ancient inhabitants of that land were testing him as a sort of rite of passage. Around 1:15 a.m., the bathroom lights went completely out. The cold became even more intense, to the point that we could see our own breath. That's when we began to hear an indigenous chant, quiet at first, but gradually increasing in volume. The electronic equipment started to malfunction. Walkie-talkies were only emitting static, cell phones were shutting down on their own, and the security cameras were showing only interference. Panic was setting in among everyone present. Marcos, Dona Celia's son, began to translate the chants echoing through the room. According to him, they were ancient prayers, speaking about trials and spiritual purification. It was as if the ancestral spirits wanted Neymar to undergo some kind of transformative experience. All this time, the players' team was in complete despair. We tried to keep the situation under control and confidential, but it was almost impossible to hide what was happening. Some cleaning staff passing by began to spread stories, and soon the buzz was spreading throughout the stadium. The most surreal was yet to come. Around 1:30 a.m., the bathroom walls began to sweat, dripping a viscous greenish liquid. The smell was a mix of wet earth and unknown herbs. Donna Celia stated that it was a sign that the portal was about to open again. The chanting grew more intense, and a bluish light began to emanate from the walls. It was something supernatural, unlike anything we had ever witnessed. The air became even denser, and a feeling of electric energy coursed through our bodies. It was at that critical moment that everything began to reach its climax. The bluish light intensified so much that we could barely keep our eyes open. Suddenly, we heard a deafening bang, as if something had broken the sound barrier, and then, out of nowhere, Neymar simply reappeared. He emerged exactly in the same stall where he had disappeared, lying on the floor, completely disoriented and gasping for breath. His clothes were intact, but there were indigenous symbols drawn on his arms with a natural ink that no one recognized. The most striking thing was his expression, a mix of fear and fascination that I will never forget. As soon as he managed to compose himself, Neymar began to recount his experience. According to him, he had been transported to a kind of ancient village where he encountered the spirits of indigenous warriors. They subjected him to a series of spiritual tests, assessing his humility, courage, and respect for the sacred land. It was like living 100 years in 2 hours, he said, still trembling. They showed me visions of the past, the present, and even some of the future. They made me understand the importance of that place, the ancestral energy that exists there. I will never be the same after this experience. Experts explained that cases like this, although extremely rare, have been documented in other places, built on sacred lands. What happened to Neymar was a kind of spiritual calling, something that ancient shamans used to do with chosen ones. The most curious thing is that when we later checked the security cameras, we discovered something even more intriguing. At the exact moment Neymar reappeared, all the stadium cameras captured a kind of aurora borealis inside the bathroom, something completely impossible to occur naturally in São Paulo. In the following days, we noticed significant changes in Neymar's behavior. He began to insist on performing gratitude rituals before games, started studying the history of Brazilian indigenous peoples, and even initiated a secret project for the preservation of sacred lands. The case was kept confidential for a long time, protected by confidentiality agreements signed by everyone present. But today, nearly 2 years later, with Neymar's own authorization, I can share this incredible story. The bathroom in question has been transformed into a kind of sanctuary, and it is still occasionally possible to hear indigenous chants echoing through its walls. Mrs. Celia continues to be the spiritual advisor of the stadium, and since then, other inexplicable events have been recorded at the site, although none as intense as what happened with Neymar. The symbols that appeared on his arms that night were studied by anthropologists and identified as belonging to a tribe that inhabited that region over 300 years ago. This experience completely changed my view of the supernatural. As a security guard, I learned to respect even more the history and energy of the places we protect. Allianz Parque is not just a football stadium. It is a portal between worlds, a place where the past and present meet in ways that science still cannot explain.
My name is Harold Thompson. I am 73 years old and I live in a small town called Millbrook. In the state of New York, I worked for almost 40 years at Oak Hill Cemetery. A place that became more than just a workplace for MIT was like a second home. I remember my first day vividly, in April 1975. I was 28 years old, newly hired as a maintenance assistant. The cemetery was vast, with over 200 acres of land. filled with old gravestones and century-old trees that seemed to hold silent stories. My initial job was simple: mow the grass, clean the graves, prepare plots, and keep everything organized. In the early years, the work was heavy, but I had always been a strong man, used to manual labor since I was young. Over time, I became familiar with every corner of that place. Each gravestone had a story. Each grave held memories of lives that once rested there. I learned to respect that space, not as a place of sadness, but as a sanctuary of memories. The years went by, and I became something of a guardian of that place. I knew each family, each story behind the names engraved on the stones. I remember one specific case that deeply marked me. In 1986, a local family, the Williamsons, lost their youngest son in a car accident. The young man, named Michael, was only 22 years old. His father, Robert Williamson, approached me days later, asking to personally choose the location where his son would be buried. We walked together through the cemetery. He wanted a spot with a beautiful view where he could see the sunset. We chose a place near an old oak tree, overlooking the mountains in the background. Every time Robert came to visit his son, he would bring me coffee, and we would sit and talk about life. My job wasn't just to keep the cemetery clean. It was to preserve memories, to be a silent guardian of the stories that rested there. Each plot I prepared, each gravestone I cleaned, was an act of respect. The most challenging years were during the harsh New York winters. I remember mornings where the temperature dropped to 15 degrees below zero, and I needed to be there, breaking the ice, preparing the spaces for potential burials. In 1992, something happened that would change my perspective on my work. A lady named Elizabeth Carter, the widow of a World War II veteran, approached me to restore her husband's grave. Jack Carter had been a war hero, decorated for bravery. I spent weeks restoring that gravestone. Each letter, each detail was carefully cleaned and restored. Elizabeth offered me hot tea every time she saw me working. She told me stories about Jack, about how they met, about the war years. At that moment, I realized my work went far beyond simply maintaining a cemetery. I was a guardian of memories, a storyteller of the silent narratives that rested there. The years went by, and I specialized. I learned techniques for restoring old gravestones, knowledge that few had. My experience became respected throughout the region. In 2005, something unusual happened at Oak Hill Cemetery. A group of local historians discovered that part of our cemetery was built over an ancient Native American settlement. This completely changed our perspective on the site. I worked side by side with archaeologists and anthropologists. I helped map sensitive areas, identifying spots where we might find historical remnants. My detailed knowledge of every inch of that land was crucial for the excavations. We uncovered fragments of pottery, some stone tools, and even remnants of campfires dating back over 300 years. It was as if each layer of soil told a different story. The archaeologists were impressed with my local knowledge. By this time, I was nearing retirement. My wife, Margaret, always said I loved that cemetery more than our own home. Perhaps she was right. The last years of work were the most significant. I was not just an employee, but a guardian of memories. Each grave, each gravestone had a story to tell, and I was the silent interpreter of those narratives. My retirement in 2010 was a bittersweet moment. After 40 years at Oak Hill Cemetery, leaving that place felt like abandoning a part of myself. The farewell ceremony was emotional. Families from several generations that I had assisted over the years attended. The town mayor presented me with a plaque of honor, recognizing my work and dedication. I remember holding back tears when I saw so many people who passed through my life over those years. I was not just an employee, I was a guardian of memories. Today, at 73 years old, I still visit the cemetery weekly. I talk with the current staff, share stories, and advise on preservation. My wife, Margaret, always jokes that I can't completely disconnect. Young people today don't understand the value of preserving memories. For me, each gravestone was a book of untold stories. Each name engraved represented a life, a dream, an interrupted story. In the silence of that place, I learned that death is not the end, but merely a passage. And my work has always been to keep alive the memories of those who have gone. In recent years, I have dedicated myself to writing a book about my experience at Oak Hill Cemetery. Each page is a piece of my life. Each chapter a story kept for decades in silence and respect. My granddaughter, Sarah, a young historian, helps me organize the manuscripts. She digitizes old photographs, documents the stories I share. Together, we are creating a historical archive about that place that was my life. Sometimes, when silence falls over my house, I close my eyes and can smell the damp earth, hear the sound of birds in the cemetery, feel the weight of each story I have kept for so long. Oak Hill was not just a job, it was my vocation, my quiet mission to preserve memories.
Have you ever wondered what it would be like to walk side by side with the spirits of those you loved, unaware that they were gone? I didn't know as I strolled through the sun-soaked streets of Salvador Bahia that the laughter echoing in my ears belonged to voices that had long since faded from the world of the living. The vibrant colors of my neighborhood, BARRA, painted a picture of life, but beneath the surface lurked shadows that would soon unravel my understanding of reality. My name is THIAGO, a name as common as the gentle ocean breeze that swept through the streets, carrying with it the scent of acarajé and the distant sound of samba music. I had always felt a connection to my family that transcended the ordinary. Growing up in a modest home on Rua da Paciencia, I was surrounded by the warmth of my mother, Maria, and my younger sister, Lucia. They were my world, my anchors in the tumultuous sea of adolescence. But that world shattered one fateful afternoon, when I received a call that left me reeling. A tragic accident had taken them both from me. In the weeks that followed, I found solace in my memories, clinging to the belief that they were still with me in spirit. I often ventured to the Praça da Sé, where the palm trees swayed gently and the sunlight filtered through the leaves like whispers from the past. It was there that I first sensed their presence, a strange but comforting feeling that wrapped around me like a warm embrace. I would talk to them as if they were still alive, sharing my hopes and fears, feeling their laughter dance in the air around me. It was a balm for my broken heart, a way to cope with the unthinkable loss. But strange occurrences began to unfold. The shadows in my home seemed to flicker with a life of their own, and I would catch glimpses of figures out of the corner of my eye, familiar silhouettes that sent a chill down my spine. One evening, as I sat on the balcony listening to the distant sounds of the city, I felt a cool breeze brush against my cheek, a whisper of laughter echoing in the twilight. I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination, a trick of my grief-stricken mind. After all, who wouldn't want their loved ones back even for just a moment longer? Yet the signs grew more pronounced. Objects would move inexplicably, and soft murmurs filled the air when I was alone. I could feel their presence during the quiet hours of the night. When the world outside faded into silence, I began to question my sanity. Was I truly conversing with Maria and Lucia, or was I spiraling deeper into despair? The beauty of Salvador, the rhythmic pulse of its streets, contrasted sharply with the darkness that was creeping into my life. The vibrant murals that adorned the walls seemed to watch me with knowing eyes, as if the city itself held secrets of its own. My past weighed heavily on me, a trauma that clung to my heart like a shadow, one that I was both eager and terrified to confront. But when night fell, something inexplicable happened. As darkness enveloped Salvador, the city transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. My balcony, once a haven of afternoon sun and laughter, now felt like a stage for an unseen play, where I was both the audience and the unwilling participant. Each night brought with it a deeper sense of dread, a reminder that the boundary between life and death had blurred in my grief-stricken mind. I had always been skeptical of fire, the supernatural, but the inexplicable occurrences became harder to ignore. One night, as I sat in silence, a sudden gust of wind rattled the shutters. I felt an icy shiver run down my spine, and I instinctively glanced over my shoulder. There, illuminated by the soft glow of the street lamp, stood a figure. My heart raced as recognition washed over me. It was Lucia, her laughter echoing in the air, but this was different. It was sharper, tinged with urgency. "THIAGO," she called, the sound both comforting and chilling. "You have to listen." But as I reached out, she faded like mist, leaving me alone with the oppressive silence. I was left with a haunting question. Was I losing my grip on reality, or was something deeper at play? The next day, I sought answers. I wandered through the crowded streets of my neighborhood, the vibrant energy of Salvador now feeling foreign. My feet led me to a small bookstore tucked away on a side street, owned by an elderly woman named Donna Rosa. She had always been a fixture in the community, her wise eyes reflecting a lifetime of stories. "THIAGO," she said, her voice smooth, as the waves crashing against the shore. "You've been carrying a heavy burden. I can see it in your eyes." I hesitated but knew I couldn't hide my pain from her. I poured out my heart, recounting the laughter that echoed in my mind, the shadows that haunted my home. Donna Rosa listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to something more profound. "You're not alone in this," she said finally. "Many have walked this path. Sometimes the veil between our world and the next is thin. If your spirits are reaching out, it may be for a reason." Donna Rosa's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "But be careful," she warned. "Not all spirits come with good intentions." I felt a chill creep down my spine. "What do you mean?" "Some seek closure, others seek to manipulate," she replied, her gaze piercing mine. "You must confront what's been left unresolved." As I left the bookstore, my heart raced with anticipation and fear. I had always believed grief was a solitary journey, but now I realized that I was part of a larger tapestry, woven with the threads of life and death. That evening, I returned to the Plaza da Sé, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the distant strumming of guitars. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds wash over me, and whispered Lucia's name into the night, hoping for a sign. As if summoned by my call, the shadows around me began to shift. Figures danced in the periphery of my vision, and laughter filled the air. This time, it felt more sinister. My heart pounded as I felt a presence behind me. I turned, and there stood a woman, her face obscured by a veil of darkness, her eyes glinting with something that felt both familiar and terrifying. "THIAGO," she beckoned, her voice a haunting echo of the past. "You've forgotten. It's time to remember." The world spun around me, and I realized that the shadows I'd once sought comfort in were now threatening to engulf me. I was being pulled deeper into something far beyond my understanding, and the stakes were higher than I ever imagined. With each passing moment, I felt my grasp on reality slipping. I had to confront whatever this was, before it consumed me entirely. The journey into the unknown had truly begun, and I was unprepared for the revelations that awaited me. I stumbled back, my mind racing as the woman's words echoed in my head. "You've forgotten. It's time to remember." The weight of her gaze felt like a chain, dragging me deeper into the shadows of my own memories. I could hardly breathe, the air thick with the scent of incense and something more acrid, fear. "Remember what?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. The figure stepped closer, the darkness around her swirling like smoke, and I felt an unsettling familiarity wash over me. Suddenly, I was taken back to a summer night years ago, when Lucia and I had wandered through these very streets, our laughter mingling with the vibrant nightlife, our dreams as bright as the stars above. But that night had ended in tragedy, and I had buried those memories deep, locked away in a corner of my mind. "You need to confront the truth about her," the woman urged, her voice a haunting melody that plucked at the strings of my heart. "You've hidden from it long enough." "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice rising with desperation. "What do you want from me?" She smiled, but it was a smile that sent chills coursing through my veins. "I'm a fragment of your past, a reflection of your guilt. You think you can escape it, but it is in you, THIAGO. Lucia's laughter, her joy, it all turned to sorrow because you refused to see. The ground felt unsteady beneath me, and I clutched my head, the memories flooding back in painful waves. I could see Lucia's face, her radiant smile. But then I saw the day I lost her, an argument, a reckless decision, a devastating accident that changed everything. I had blamed myself for years, but I had buried that guilt under layers of denial, believing that if I didn't acknowledge it, it wouldn't haunt me. Lucia, I whispered, my heart racing. Is this really you? Are you trying to tell me something? The woman nodded, and I felt a surge of warmth mixed with the cold dread of realization. You must seek forgiveness both for her and for yourself. Only then can you find peace. Just as I thought I might grasp the meaning of her words, the shadows around us swirled violently, and I heard a low, menacing growl. Suddenly, figures emerged from the darkness, faces twisted in anguish. They reached for me, their hands grasping at the air, and I realized they were the souls of those who had suffered because of my inaction, my silence. I was surrounded by not just memories, but the true cost of my grief. Get away from me, I shouted, stumbling back, but the figures closed in, their wails filling my ears. I could feel the weight of their pain, and it suffocated me. This realization hit me like a tidal wave. My grief had not just been mine, it had woven itself into the lives of others, creating a tapestry of sorrow that I had never recognized. Stop, I cried out, panic rising in my chest. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. The woman stepped forward, her dark veil lifting just enough for me to see her face, Lucia's face. My heart shattered as I recognized the truth. The pain I had tried to escape was now a living entity, demanding to be confronted. Face it, THIAGO, she urged, her voice a mixture of love and sorrow. You can't run from this any longer. You have to remember everything. The shadows pressed closer, and I felt the suffocation of my past tighten around me. I was on the brink of losing my sanity, confronted not just by the specters of my memories, but by the realization that I had been complicit in my own suffering. I had to confront the truth about Lucia, about myself, and about the darkness that now threatened to consume me. And just as I thought I might succumb to it, a voice broke through the chaos, a familiar voice. THIAGO, you're not alone. It was Donna Rosa, her presence a beacon in the storm of shadows. Help me, I shouted, reaching for her, knowing that this was only the beginning of my journey into the truth. The stakes had never been higher, and I had to unravel the tangled threads of my past before it was too late. The shadows closed in, their twisted faces a haunting reminder of all I had lost, all I had avoided confronting. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat urging me to fight against the darkness that threatened to swallow me whole. I could feel Lucia's presence, her warmth juxtaposed against the chill of despair that enveloped me. THIAGO, you're not alone. Donna Rosa's voice sliced through the cacophony of anguish, pulling me back to the present, anchoring me in a reality I desperately needed to cling to. I turned to her, desperation clawing at my throat. Help me. She stepped forward, her eyes fierce yet compassionate. You have to face this, my boy. You can't let them control you anymore. The figures around me wailed louder, their cries melding into a single soul-rending chorus that echoed my own guilt. I could feel their despair, their need for resolution, and it ignited a fire within me. I had spent too long running, too long hiding from the memories that haunted me. I had to confront them, and I had to do it now. Lucia, I called out, my voice steadying as I focused on her face, the one I had loved so fiercely. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened. The words tumbled from my lips, raw and unfiltered. I never meant for this to happen. I thought I could forget, but I was wrong. The shadows recoiled slightly at my confession, their agonized expressions faltering as they processed my admission. I could see Lucia's face soften, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You must forgive yourself, THIAGO. Only then can you forgive me. I took a step forward, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders, yet emboldened by the flicker of hope ignited by her words. I can't change the past, but I can learn from it. I stood tall, facing the dark figures, as they swirled around me. You have no power over me anymore. I refuse to be your prisoner. The shadows hissed, a cacophony of disapproval, but I didn't waver. I felt Donna Rosa's presence beside me, a steadying force as she placed a hand on my shoulder. You are stronger than you realize, THIAGO. They feed on your fear, show them your light. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I summoned the memories of Lucia, the laughter, the warmth, the love. I envisioned her smile, the way her eyes sparkled under the summer stars. I remembered the dreams we shared, the future we envisioned. Lucia, I love you. I will carry you with me, always. The shadows recoiled, their forms shifting as my words resonated through the darkness. I could sense their grip on me weakening, their cries transforming into whispers. You can't keep me here, I shouted, my voice reverberating with newfound power. I choose to remember, not in sorrow but in love. As if responding to my declaration, the shadows began to dissipate, swirling away like smoke in the wind. I felt the pressure around me lift and the anguished faces faded into the night. The weight of my guilt began to lift, replaced by a profound sense of clarity. But just as I felt the first taste of freedom, a new spectre emerged from the smoke. A figure cloaked in darkness, its intentions obscured, stood before me. You think this is over? It whispered, a chilling smirk forming on its lips. You've only scratched the surface. Donna Rosa's grip tightened on my shoulder, and I felt the ground shift beneath me, the battle far from over. The confrontation with my past had awakened something deeper, something that could either save me or lead me further into the abyss. I took a deep breath, ready to face whatever lay ahead. I had come too far to turn back now. I stood heart racing, staring at the cloaked figure that had materialized from the dissipating shadows. Its presence felt like a storm, a harbinger of chaos threatening to engulf me once more. I could sense the fear creeping back, but I clung to the warmth of Lucia's memory, allowing it to shield me. I may have confronted my guilt, but the battle was not over. What do you want? I demanded, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The figure chuckled, a sound that resonated with malice. You think you've broken free? You still carry the burden of your past and it will always haunt you, it whispered, the air thickening with its words. I felt a chill run through me, but I refused to give in. Before I could respond, I felt Donna Rosa's hand tighten around my shoulder, grounding me once again. Remember, THIAGO, you have allies now. You're not alone in this fight. Her voice was a lifeline, and I drew strength from it. The figure leaned closer, its gaze piercing through the darkness. Allies. What are they but shadows of their own fears? They will betray you, just like you betrayed her. Each word was a dagger aimed at my heart. I flinched but held my ground. No, I shouted, shaking off the creeping despair. I will not let you manipulate me any longer. I will find a way to heal, for Lucia, for myself. With that declaration, I felt a surge of energy pulse through me, igniting the space around us. The figure faltered, its smirk fading into a grimace. I focused on Lucia's love, channeling it as a protective barrier against the darkness. The shadows writhed, caught between my resolve and the figure's malevolence. As the energy intensified, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was as if the very act of confronting this nightmare was carving out a piece of me, leaving scars both visible and invisible. I gasped, but I pushed through, knowing that transformation often came with sacrifice. Suddenly, the cloaked figure shrieked, its form wavering. This isn't the end, THIAGO. You think you've won? I will find you again. And with a final, echoing laugh, it vanished, leaving only a lingering sense of dread in its wake. I collapsed to my knees, breathless and shaken. The remnants of the shadows faded into the ether, but I could still feel their whispers brushing against my mind. I had survived, but I was irrevocably changed. The scars of my guilt would remain, reminders of the cost of my confrontation. Donna Rosa knelt beside me, her eyes filled with concern. You did well, but this isn't over. The darkness may have retreated, but it's still lurking, waiting for you to falter. I nodded, the weight of her words settling heavily on my shoulders. I had found a measure of peace, but the battle against my inner demons was far from finished. As I rose, unsteadily, I noticed the flicker of light from the nearby village. The flickering lanterns seemed to pulse with life. I looked to Donna Rosa, her expression a mixture of pride and worry. We need to gather everyone, THIAGO. There's a lot to discuss. You may have faced your past, but there are others who need your strength now. I could see it clearly. The faces of my friends, my family, all intertwined in this web of shadows and light. I thought of Lucia, her laughter echoing in my mind, and I felt a spark of determination ignite within me. But just as we began to move towards the village, a chilling breeze swept through the air, carrying with it a whisper that sent shivers down my spine. You can't escape me forever. The journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was merely the beginning of something much larger. As we walked, a sense of foreboding settled over me, mingling with the hope that flickered in my heart. The shadows were woven into the fabric of my life, and I could only wonder what secrets they still held. The night was far from over, and I was ready to face whatever lay ahead, not just for Lucia, but for every soul touched by the darkness. I turned to Donna Rosa, my heart pounding in my chest as the cool night air enveloped us. "We can face this together," I said, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. The chilling breeze carried the figure's threat, embedding itself in my mind like a parasite. As we stepped into the village, the flickering lanterns cast eerie shadows that danced along the cobbled street. I felt the eyes of the townsfolk upon me, their whispers wrapping around us like a shroud. They sensed the darkness that lingered, a palpable tension hanging in the air. I thought of Lucia, the warmth of her laughter now a ghostly echo, and I felt the weight of the past pressing down on me. Suddenly, a scream pierced the night, a sound of pure terror that tore through the fabric of my resolve. I rushed toward the source, heart racing, only to find a gathering crowd pointing toward the well. My stomach dropped as I pushed through the throng, the sight before me chilling my blood. The well was filled with shadows swirling and writhing as though alive, a dark vortex threatening to spill over. "The darkness has returned," a voice whispered from behind me. I turned to see the cloaked figure re-emerging from the shadows, its eyes glinting with malicious delight. "Did you really think you could escape me? You have merely delayed the inevitable." The crowd gasped as its tendrils slithered among them, grasping at their fears, their insecurities. I realized then the true horror. The darkness was not just mine. It had seeped into the hearts of everyone around me. I had fought for my freedom, but at what cost? With a heavy heart, I took a step back, knowing I could not bear to pull them into my chaos. The shadows surged forward, their grip tightening around my friends and family. I felt a deep sorrow wash over me, a bitter realization that perhaps my own fight was futile. I could never truly conquer the darkness without sacrificing those I loved. As I turned to flee, the last thing I heard was the haunting laughter of the figure echoing in the wind. "You cannot escape your destiny, THIAGO. You will always belong to the shadows." The village flickered in and out of focus, the faces of my loved ones becoming distant memories as I was swallowed by the darkness. And in that moment I understood. I had not just confronted my past, I had unwittingly embraced my own demise. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more tales that explore the depths of fear and humanity. Share this with your friends so they can also embark on this mystery-filled adventure. Leave a comment below telling us your favorite part, or what kind of ending you'd like to see in a future story.